Picture this. It's 1967 and the king of rock and roll is at the peak of his fame. Elvis Presley, the man who made millions of hearts skip a beat, is about to have his own heart stopped by 4 simple words from his wife. When Priscilla nervously approaches him in their Graceland bedroom, her hands trembling as she holds a positive pregnancy test, neither of them realizes this single moment will redefine their entire relationship. The news that should bring joy instead becomes the catalyst for the most dramatic transformation their marriage has ever seen. What happens next will shock you and reveal the vulnerable man behind the legend. The morning sun streamed through the ornate windows of Graceland as Priscilla Presley sat alone in their master bathroom, staring at the small plastic stick that would change everything. For weeks, she had suspected something was different. The nausea that hit her like waves, the exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure, and the strange new sensitivity to smells that once brought her comfort. Now, holding the positive pregnancy test in her trembling hands, all her suspicions were confirmed. At 22, Priscilla had been Mrs. Elvis Presley for less than 2 months. Their wedding in Las Vegas had been a whirlwind affair, complete with sequins, photographers, and the ever-present crowd of fans and media. But now, in the quiet solitude of their private sanctuary, she faced a reality that terrified her more than any spotlight ever could. How would Elvis react? They had talked about children in abstract terms, someday in the distant future, but this was real, immediate, and completely unplanned. Elvis was downstairs, probably already surrounded by his usual entourage of friends, bodyguards, and hangers-on who had become permanent fixtures at Graceland. The Memphis Mafia, as they were known, created a constant buffer between Elvis and the outside world, but they also made intimate conversations nearly impossible. Priscilla knew she needed to find the right moment, the right words, to tell the man she loved that their lives were about to change forever. She studied her reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for signs of the life growing within her. Her face looked the same, but everything felt different. The weight of the secret pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had always been the composed one in their relationship, the steady presence who could calm Elvis's mercurial moods and ground him when his world spun too fast. But now she felt as uncertain and vulnerable as a child herself. The sound of Elvis's distinctive laugh echoed from downstairs, followed by the familiar cadence of his voice telling one of his animated stories. Soon she would have to interrupt that comfortable rhythm with news that would either bring them closer together or drive an irreparable wedge between them. Taking one last deep breath, Priscilla carefully tucked the pregnancy test into her purse and prepared to face the most important conversation of her young marriage. Elvis was holding court in Graceland's living room, regaling his friends with tales from his latest recording session when Priscilla appeared in the doorway. Something in her expression immediately caught his attention. After years of knowing her, first as the shy 14-year-old he'd met in Germany and now as his wife, he could read her moods like sheet music. The usual spark in her eyes was replaced by something he couldn't quite identify, a mixture of excitement and fear that made his stomach tighten with anticipation. "Elvis," she said softly, her voice cutting through the laughter and conversation. "Could we talk privately for a moment?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to them. Elvis felt the familiar weight of being watched, analyzed, and judged, even by those closest to him. He nodded and stood, his movements more careful than usual, as if he sensed that whatever Priscilla needed to tell him would require his full attention. They walked upstairs to their bedroom, leaving behind the curious stares and whispered speculations of the Memphis Mafia. Once alone, Elvis sat heavily on the edge of their king-sized bed, his hands clasped together in front of him. Priscilla remained standing by the window, backlit by the afternoon sun, looking almost ethereal in her simple dress. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and mounting tension. "What is it, baby?" Elvis asked, his voice gentler now, free from the performative quality it took on around others. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Priscilla took a shaky breath and reached into her purse, retrieving the pregnancy test she had hidden there like a secret weapon. She held it out to him without a word, watching as his eyes focused on the small plastic indicator that would change their lives forever. Elvis stared at it for what felt like an eternity. his expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, something Priscilla couldn't quite read. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly, his famous voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears beginning to well in her eyes, despite her efforts to remain composed. This wasn't how she had imagined telling him, but then again, nothing about their relationship had ever followed conventional patterns. They had navigated the complexities of fame, age differences, and intense public scrutiny, but this felt different, more consequential than anything they had faced before. Elvis stood slowly and walked to the window beside her, looking out at the grounds of Graceland as if seeing them for the first time. When he finally turned back to face her, his expression had transformed into something she had never seen before, a mixture of wonder, terror, and profound responsibility that aged him years in a matter of moments. What happened next would be seared into Priscilla's memory forever. Instead of the joy or excitement she had hoped for, Elvis's reaction was something entirely unexpected. He sat down heavily in the antique chair by their bedroom window, put his head in his hands, and began to cry. Not the dramatic tears of a performer, but the quiet, desperate sobs of a man overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility he never thought he was ready for. "Elvis," Priscilla moved toward him, her own fears momentarily forgotten in the face of his unexpected vulnerability. She had seen him nervous before performances, frustrated with his management, even angry at the constraints of his career, but she had never seen him break down like this. The king of rock and roll, the man who could command the attention of millions, looked smaller and more fragile than she had ever imagined possible. "I don't know how to be a father," he whispered, his words barely audible through his tears. "Hell, Priscilla, I don't even know how to be a husband most days. The colonel has me booked solid for the next 2 years, and I can barely find time for us as it is. How am I supposed to raise a child when I'm never home?" The honesty in his voice was devastating. This wasn't the Elvis the world knew, the confident performer who moved with swagger and spoke with authority. This was the man beneath the legend, terrified of failing at the most important role he would ever play. Priscilla knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers, feeling the calluses from years of guitar playing and the slight tremor that betrayed his emotional state. "We'll figure it out together," she said, trying to inject confidence into her voice that she didn't entirely feel. "Elvis, look at me." When he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, she saw something that broke her heart. He looked lost, like the young man who had left for the army years ago, uncertain about his future and his place in the world. "What if I'm like my father?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. "What if I can't provide the stability a child needs? What if I mess this up like I've messed up everything else?" The raw vulnerability in his question revealed the depth of his fears. Elvis had always carried the weight of his family's expectations, his fans' adoration, and his own perfectionism. Now, faced with the prospect of fatherhood, all of those pressures seemed to converge into a single, overwhelming responsibility. Priscilla realized that this moment wasn't just about announcing a pregnancy. It was about confronting the man Elvis feared he might become and the father he desperately wanted to be. In the days that followed Priscilla's announcement, something fundamental shifted in their relationship. The pregnancy became a catalyst that stripped away the layers of performance and pretense that had accumulated around their marriage like dust on furniture. For the first time since their wedding, Elvis began to see Priscilla not just as his wife or his refuge from the chaos of fame, but as his true partner in the most important venture of their lives. The change was subtle at first. Elvis started sending the Memphis Mafia home earlier in the evenings, creating space for quiet conversations about their future. They would sit together on the steps of Graceland's front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, talking about baby names, nursery colors, and the kind of parents they wanted to be. These moments of intimacy, rare in their previous relationship dynamic, became the foundation of a deeper connection than either had expected. But the transformation wasn't without its challenges. Elvis's fear of fatherhood manifested in unexpected ways. He became almost obsessively protective of Priscilla, insisting that she avoid stairs, rest more, and limit her activities in ways that sometimes felt suffocating. His concern, born from love and terror in equal measure, occasionally sparked arguments that revealed the fault lines in their relationship. Priscilla, who had always been independent despite her young age, struggled with Elvis's sudden need to control every aspect of her pregnancy. "I'm having a baby, not dying," she told him one evening after he'd insisted she couldn't attend a simple dinner with friends. "You can't wrap me in cotton and expect me to disappear until the baby arrives." Elvis's response surprised them both. Instead of the defensive anger she expected, he sat down beside her and admitted something that changed everything. "I'm terrified, Scylla. I'm terrified that something will happen to you, that something will happen to the baby, that I won't be good enough for either of you. I know I'm being crazy, but I don't know how else to handle feeling this scared." That conversation became a turning point. They established new boundaries and communication patterns that acknowledged both Elvis's fears and Priscilla's needs. For the first time in their relationship, they began to function as true equals, making decisions together rather than Elvis dictating terms based on his career demands or emotional impulses. The pregnancy had forced them to confront not just their individual fears, but the dynamics that had defined their relationship since they first met. As Priscilla's belly began to show, Elvis would often place his hands on her growing bump, marveling at the life they had created together. In those quiet moments, the weight of his fame seemed to lift, replaced by something far more profound and personal. He was no longer just Elvis Presley, the entertainer. He was going to be a father, and that identity felt both terrifying and transformative in ways he was only beginning to understand. The news of Priscilla's pregnancy didn't just announce the arrival of their daughter, Lisa Marie. It marked the beginning of a completely new chapter in Elvis and Priscilla's relationship. What started as a moment of vulnerability and fear became the foundation for a deeper, more authentic connection than they had ever experienced. While their marriage would face many more challenges in the years to come, this pivotal moment taught them that true intimacy comes not from perfection, but from the courage to be vulnerable with each other. Ready to discover more untold stories from the lives of music's greatest legends? Subscribe now for exclusive behind-the-scenes revelations that will change how you see your favorite stars forever. Hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we reveal next.